All right, guys, welcome to the Strong for Life podcast. I'm joined today with Sarah Smith. I first came across Sarah's work, it would have been back in 2011 when I first started coaching. She was a very well-established coach in Ireland at the time. She's now doing business mentoring, so actually helping coaches turn their business into something that they can do long-term in a financially viable way. And we're going to talk specifically around schizophrenia on today's podcast, around how it's affected both of our lives, because we both have family members with schizophrenia. But Sarah, yeah, thank you for jumping on. And maybe if you want to give a bit of an intro about yourself as well before we jump in.
Thanks for that intro, Connor. I didn't know that you were following me for that long. Back then in 2011, I think I was talking about online back then with kettlebells, just
Yeah.
constantly talking about kettlebell. And I kind of grown since then. So yeah, like thanks for having me on. I think that it was amazing the post that you did when you were sharing about your experience with your mom and schizophrenia and how the struggle and the suffering that's involved. And it's something that has really influenced my career. Is my brother's suffering of schizophrenia? Because as we were talking before we recorded, there's that fear that you will be affected by it as well, because that's also based on statistics and facts. So that's what got me to really delve into the health and fitness industry. Was if he's nearly been robbed of that opportunity to really be fit and be healthy, then I felt like I have a chance to feel great and in my body and mind, and so that's why I think it's contributed to me being in the industry so long.
Yeah, big
Yeah.
time. And I think, yeah, like the reason we wanted to specifically talk about schizophrenia is because my mother has schizophrenia, Sarah's brother has schizophrenia. What we want to do is for people to realize that we've both turned out okay for the most part. And I think Sarah has kind of touched on it as well, but I had a lot of fear when I was growing up that, like, geez, look at my mother, I'm going to end up, completely have no quality of life either. But you just touch on something there that gave me a huge amount of confidence growing up as well, around maybe being able to take a bit of control over the situation. And it was around epigenetics. So I read something in a
Yeah.
book about, like, I can't remember what book it was, but it was just like you can turn certain genes on and off. Now there's actually a ton of research coming out about, like, the impact of metabolic health. And let's say me and you, it might be expressed as schizophrenia with our family history. For someone else, it might turn into ADHD or another sort of like Alzheimer's or something like that. So there's a really, actually I have it here in front of me. If you've seen Christopher Palmer's stuff, have you?
I haven't actually.
Let
Okay.
me just,
Taking
very,
note.
very good.
Yeah.
So he wrote a book called
Brain
Brain
energy.
Energy.
Yeah.
He was on Tim Ferriss, like on all the podcasts. I think he was on Huberman and all these people as well.
Mm.
And basically that's what he's seeing now with his research, is that, like, it's not necessarily like a genetic thing. It's more
Mhm.
like maybe you're at risk and you just have the same patterns as your parents. So you eat the same food, maybe you're inactive as well. And then it gets expressed for some people as like a mental health challenge, like schizophrenia or bipolar or something along those lines. But then, like, there's a story in the book which is just completely crazy, where the woman is like 65 or 70. She's had severe schizophrenia like her whole life for like 40, 45 years. He put her on
Mhm.
a ketogenic diet and she was fine.
Are
Like
you serious?
she was literally fine.
After how long? And after how long? I'm interested.
Like
And did she
a
wean
few
off the
months.
medication? Really?
I think it was slowly weaning off. Now, I don't want people to think like, yeah, I can
Yeah.
just go, and I talked to my mother about this. Like, I'm always trying to get her to eat meat, but she's vegetarian, but she went from being, you know, terrible diet, drinking a bottle of wine a night, eating crap, being like 3 stone overweight. Now she's lost, 3, 4 stone over the last kind of 8 years, and is
Wow.
much healthier than what she was. So that's brilliant. Um,
Mhm.
but I think
That's
that's
great.
just a really important thing as well. Like, I think a negative, the thing I don't like about schizophrenia is, like, you have schizophrenia. Now you're a
Yeah.
schizophrenic. And it's
Yeah.
like, if people were kind of shown more, this is a transient state of maybe psychosis you're going through, and maybe that's your heightened state, but like there's a lot of things we can do to improve the situation over the long term rather than like, here's this horrible label and that's it. And here's tons of
Yeah,
medication. Like, yeah, I would love to hear
yeah,
your thoughts.
yeah. I agree with that completely, definitely. And but without sounding negative,
Yep.
what pissed me off during the process with my brother was some very alternative people within our community that had some really outlandish ideas of how my brother could be cured of schizophrenia that were just not helpful, and you know, including things like just tie him up in the forest and let all that shit out, and you know, he'll be fine again type thing. And my parents run health food stores for the last 35 years. And so we're very well versed on nutrition. We were brought up farm to table. We never
Mm,
had any processed foods in the family, etc. So we're very well versed on that. But we would have gone through a lot of people's opinions of you know, and I'm totally open to them. But without the medication, my brother would not be alive.
yeah.
And without the health system, much as it fails people, and it's not a great system, still he literally wouldn't be alive. And so I'm all for different perspectives, different ways to alleviate, different ways to manage it. But sometimes I was genuinely just hurt and angry when people would refuse to hear the pain and the suffering that we were going through and that he was going through, and how without that medication he would not be alive. And without the health service, like what you were talking about in your post about the gap between hospitalization and being at home, you know, and
You
that's
want to
a really,
explain that actually for people listening, that
yeah. So
because that's
like,
the biggest problem, I think, is waiting for something really bad to happen to take action. But yeah, please jump in.
yeah, like I've gone through quite a lot of trauma, and so has my whole family, on stages where there was no space in the hospital, or my brother wasn't deemed to be a danger to himself or others for the tick list of what that is. And even though he was psychotic, he was speaking to himself, he was, all the symptoms, you know, were there, and he's at the house as a family, you know, living like that. And so there's we go to the hospital, and more than often you're sent to A&E. So you're sitting there with someone really vulnerable, yeah, and scared, and you're in A&E, and you're like, this is not a problem physically. Okay, we need to get a bed here. We need to get, and so then often you're sent home, you know, and then we're trying to sleep, we're trying to live our lives, dealing with a psychosis from your loved one. And you know, I spent a lot of time trying to talk him down from extreme paranoia where he wouldn't leave, you know, his bedroom or what have you, convinced of, you know, people out to get him. And for him it was very, very real. And so what I took from your post about that gap in between hospitalization, yeah, where they're deemed not to be bad enough or whatever, has led to my brother being in some really, really dangerous and horrific situations involving police, you know, the guards, and not pretty at all. And then really the system being forced into taking him into hospital because he was then a danger to himself and others. And so then, if it wasn't for the halfway houses that the system provided for us, it would have been really that our lives were at risk at times at home because he was psychotic. Now I've learned to separate my brother and the illness. That wasn't my
Mm,
brother trying to, you know, harm us. It was the illness. Um, and so I think that it's really hard for families when you're sitting waiting on bated breath for a phone call to know that they've got a bed. Or my brother has had a bed, but because they were playing with the medications and things, he had been suicidal.
yeah.
Um, and so that was also difficult phone calls to get, when he does finally get a bed, but something isn't clicking in. And so I think those the services that they provide that you shared are just absolutely underfunded. They're amazing what they're doing. They're a lifesaver for families, just to even help keep the family unit together, because it can really tear families apart because it's just so traumatic. So I think it's really, really important to that's why I got involved in this, to try to contribute to the likes of those service providers that are a lifeline for the person suffering with the schizophrenia, but also for the families, because there's only so much that you can do. I had to scramble to learn. This was many years ago, so it wasn't so much online that I would have gone to look for stuff. I was buying physical books and going to
Mm. How
meetings.
old was your brother when it first started?
Think it was like 22, 22, 23. Um,
And do you know,
yeah.
was there any onset, like any reason for the onset?
Yeah, there was two different reasons. One was a drug psychosis, because he was doing drugs, and the drug psychosis, when we got the diagnosis off the professor in Galway in the hospital, me and my mum sat in the car park, and we my mum said, it's a drug psychosis, and I was like, I really hope it is, because it's having very similar symptoms, but it may not be. And the
Mm.
professor said, I'll never forget his words that have stuck with me. That he said, think of your brother like a transistor radio it's been dropped from the top of a building. And then you go to turn on the radio, and one day you're going to get static, and another day you're going to hear a really clear song off the radio, and another day you're going to get nothing. He goes, that's what your brother has got, schizophrenia. It's not a drug psychosis. It's for life, and he's going to be on several medications for life. And I'm like, fuck, because if it had been a drug psychosis, it would have been easier to work through. It wouldn't have been long term, and the symptoms were so similar that we were just really, really, really confused. So drugs had brought it on, and then also my grandfather had passed away from a heart attack, and we were incredibly close to him, and that's when his
Mm.
symptoms started to really exaggerate. And I was like, this isn't normal behavior at a funeral, or during this grieving process. There were several symptoms that were there for many years, but that got masked behind really drink and drug abuse. Um,
Got it. So he was 22, and was your grandfather passing before then?
no, it was sudden. It was like a sudden heart attack. So he passed, I think, maybe the year before my brother got diagnosed, and it was my
Okay.
grandmother that said, I think it's schizophrenia because of his posture. She'd said she'd recognized it before she came over for a visit,
Ah.
and she'd said it to my mum. She said his posture's off. It's all, he was up really late at night. He was just so many different symptoms there. Sometimes even just
Mm.
painful to think back on. But they were there. But again, there was more of a lack of education around it, maybe 25 years ago, and a huge stigma as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because like when the person, so if in my case, my mother is in psychosis, like it's complete madness. It's horrible. It's the scariest thing ever. It's a completely different person. But the thing I'm thinking about a lot recently is there's because all the work I do is around injury rehab with clients. There's tons of research now around like no-cebic language, which basically means if you go to a doctor with back pain and he's like, "Oh, you got degenerative disc disease," it
Mhm.
sounds very bad, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Jesus.
Thanks.
Uh, and that's basically what no-cebic language is. It's like it sounds really bad and kind of scary, and then the person's like, "Oh, my back is screwed." And then they're like, "Yeah, you're gonna have to get a scan. Oh yeah, there it is. Probably need to get surgery on that." Then they get surgery, and then they have like a bad back forever.
Mm.
Then if the languages are related in a way where it's like, yeah, you've got degenerative disc disease, but like 40% of the population have this as well. Um,
Mm.
and these are the treatment patterns that work best for people. This is what we normally do. And like maybe down the line we might need to go surgery, but really that's like step five.
Mm.
That's a much more like giving the person more autonomy around the situation. They can actually start being like, okay, I have some control over this rather than, well, I'm just doomed, like my back is screwed forever. Um,
Mm.
and I'm
Yeah.
like, the more and then I'm seeing this with clients as well, where they're like, oh, no, no, I've got a bad back. And we're like, yeah, let's do this. And they're like, oh, my back feels better. My back pain's gone now. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
uh, the power of that just kind of belief system. So, like, I would just love to see that sort of language being used around mental health as well, being like, yes, you've gone through a period of psychosis, 100%.
Mm.
This is schizophrenia, but like
Mm.
we can improve your situation with these tools,
Mm.
and I think that kind of, like my mother used to always say, like labeling is disabling. So
Yeah.
once you get that label, that's it's a pretty bad label. Like you've got
Yeah.
schizophrenia. Like that's
Yeah. Yeah.
not many
Yeah.
things that are going to be as bad as that for I think personally. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's the whole thing I'm thinking about a lot more recently is like, again, it's that like, so what happens when the person's told they have this thing? Okay, medication, and maybe they don't really do anything else, only take medication, rather
Yeah.
than like, let's focus on all these wellness tools in conjunction with
Mm.
medication. And then it's like, okay, this person is eating well when they physically feel that they can. And, they're basically improving the likelihood of like better epigenetic outcomes, we'll say, going forwards as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think I think the caveat there with that is it's a bit like having clients who are obese, and again, let's say they've been given that label, and then they
Yeah.
identify it as that, and then maybe there's others that, and so they're ready maybe as a stage of change. They're like, yeah, I need to change. They're problem aware, and then maybe there's an obese client, for example, or a binge eater or something, and they're just like, I'm fine. I'm not gonna. I've been given this label, but I'm just gonna give up. That's a little bit like what's happened with my brother.
Mm,
So with my family, he would have access to the most top-notch supplements, for example, and foods that you could
yeah.
ever get. Okay, and practitioners through my mom through all the years and the community that she has. Yeah, but he's chosen to absolutely shut down and just exist really. And that might sound harsh, other than his music, because he's a genius musician. He went to the Rock College in Dublin. He would play you any Jimi Hendrix backwards. Like he's a musical prodigy. My dad is a
Yeah.
musician. He taught him everything he knew, and then he surpassed my dad. He's a legend in Galway, and people that know
Ah,
him know. But he has chosen to be like, right, I'm schizophrenic. Fuck that.
yeah.
I'm not even going to bother. I don't think I've ever heard him say the word even to actually say I'm schizophrenic. So we've tried so many different things to get him even to leave the house. Like he will go out on his motorbike that he has. But I think because of that labeling that you mentioned, part of him is just like, you know what? I'm an outcast in society
Yeah.
because he's gotten much bigger. The physique of my family is tall and lean. No,
Hmm.
and at the day center, they do things like this sounds so typical, but like basket weaving. You know what I mean? They literally do
Mm.
it like the typical crazies you see in the films. So they've got basket weaving, but they also had gardening, and then they had a gym. And so I went maybe 5, 6 years ago to the gym. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get him to the gym. And I did get him to go up onto some of the machines and use them a bit, but like he had full clothing on, his jacket on, everything. It was so funny. And it was just short lived, and it was just a no go. And then it's the same with food.
Mm.
Like he lives for takeaways. He drinks Coca-Cola. Like none of us have fizzy drinks in the house in the family.
Yeah.
And he smokes, chain smokes. And so that's the part that really, really makes me sad. Is no matter what the fuck, like he'd cut out every picture of me in the newspaper from kettlebell medals.
Mm.
And when I got into kettlebells, he was intrigued, and he'd be like, "Oh my God," and wow. but he never got into sport at school because he was really wild. And he obviously pissed a lot of people off because he was schizophrenic too, so he's hard to be around. And
Yeah.
so a lot of his friends gave up on him, obviously. Um,
Yeah.
and so now it's like he's just like, yeah, I don't care about omegas and I don't know, dolphin therapy or whatever's out there for it. Do you know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
I yeah, like I do keep trying, and the family we do try with what we can with him, but it's one of those ones where I think the labeling it's just gone like so deep within him that he's just kind of like, no, I'm not even gonna try. You know, he's on so much medication. He's got blood tests every month. He's got like 5 doctors at one meeting. You know, like that's a lot for him. Just to he'll get really nervous about that before that comes up even. So
Mm.
yeah, the quality of life is pretty low.
And this is like so difficult because the environment that he's in is actually optimal for recovery if you guys are so health conscious and all these things. But as you said, it's just like psychologically the wounding, or I guess it would be traumatic to be told that as well, like that diagnosis. Like, Jesus, the only time I've seen this in movies is that's the killer in the movie, you know?
Yep.
Um, and it's terrible, right? So I think, yeah, and that's kind of around the no-cebic language as well. Like, um, it's a really tough one. Like, it's such a difficult one. What I guess that's always the hard part of like with Mam will say she was just stuck in the mental health system like since 1994, right? So 30
Yeah.
years. Finally, I started doing internal family systems therapy in 2020, completely changed my life, like
Wow, good for you,
unbelievably
Connor.
beneficial, incredible. Um, and then and I was doing talk therapy for 2 years before that, and that was just making things worse. Like so,
Really? In what sense,
yeah.
if you don't mind me asking, how is that making it worse?
Because if there's like a childhood trauma issue, talk therapy is it's just bringing everything up and aggravating the actual traumatic experiences, whereas something like internal family systems is specifically if there is like a child a traumatic event or a past of trauma.
Mhm.
um and I was working with a, a psychiatrist or a psychologist in Melbourne for 2 years for talk therapy. Then I went back to
Wow.
Ireland, went to a talk therapist, and he goes, "You shouldn't be doing talk therapy. You should be doing this instead."
Wow.
And I
That
was
is
like,
so
why did
interesting.
he not tell me that for 2 years?" You know,
That's so annoying.
which
So
is
it's kind of
crazy.
re-traumatizing everything when you
Yeah.
just did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Things weren't
right.
getting better at all. It was really so that's another thing for people is like it's kind of like going to like maybe a more extreme version, but you go to PT and they just hurt your shoulder or hurt your knee.
Right.
Like, you
Yeah,
know,
they're like
but
delts.
this is
And the
your
next session,
mind,
you're
so
like,
be
my shoulder's
careful.
sore. More delts.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, my shoulder's busted. Yeah, let's do burpees and overhead presses. Um,
Good analogy, yeah.
but then so I was like, whoa, like within like a session, I was like, this is already working. This is crazy.
Wow.
And then I was telling my mother and for 2 years, and she was like, yeah, I'll definitely do it. And then it's again, it's similar to like working with clients. Like there's a lot of fear, but it's
Yeah.
a more exaggerated fear, of course, because like her whole history for 30 years is going to like a authority figure in mental health and being let down repeatedly, right?
Yeah.
Um, so then she started the internal family systems therapy 18 months ago now. Completely changed her life. Like, because it's the first
Wow.
time she's someone that she can actually rely on around her mental health. Because she go to the psychiatrist and she's like, this person's trying to poison me because
Yeah.
it's like a really negative association all the time. And
Mm.
now she has someone in her corner that's she can go to. She sees her every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. Sometimes it's every week if she feels she needs more support.
Mm.
Um, but me seeing that difference, like after 30 years, like
That's astounding. That is
crazy.
astounding. And for that, because I'm going to look it up when we finish this, that
Yeah,
internal
yeah, I'll give you the
internal
lady's
family system.
details.
Yeah. Is that
Yeah.
is that for severe mental health, like schizophrenia, bipolar, like that type of thing, or is it for addiction, or like what type of stuff does that cover? Just for anyone else who's listening who might
Yeah.
family members
It's
or
I actually
themselves.
heard it on Pat Davilli's podcast and Tim
Ah,
Ferriss. They both had him on in like
yeah,
2020.
awesome.
Dick Schwartz is the guy's name. So he's a PhD in psychology, like the guy. So he's a genius.
Mm,
But basically, I think it's a good frame as well to understand your psyche. So basically, you have
mm,
got he splits it into like three systems internally. So what that means, you've got managerial parts, you've got firefighter parts, and you've got exiles. And your exiles are like your inner children. So usually you hear
mm,
about your inner child. Well, in internal family systems, it says you've got multiple inner children at multiple times during your life that you got some wounding for, and this could be big or small things that happen to you um, from birth. And
mm,
generally what happens is, so you've got, they're all in the exile category. Then you have the firefighter category, which basically they jump in anytime the exiles get triggered. And a
okay.
firefighting behavior is something like drugs, alcohol, sex, overworking, gambling, whatever pacification model you tend to go towards based on your personality type. That's like your firefighter response. And
Mm,
then um and then the managerial parts are the kind of the parts that's your like day-to-day psyche. So like, being on time, going to work, doing all these things. Maybe it's like people pleasing, wanting to be accepted, all these things, but that's generally the category of your managerial parts. So
mm,
then you can kind of start seeing what's happening within your system. So for me, I had a lot of like rage. I would just
yeah.
burst out into anger and I wouldn't know why it was happening. I'd be like, why am I
Mm,
wrecking everything? This is doesn't make any sense. And then I would hate that response.
mm,
And anytime you just hate something, that's never going to recover the behavior or
mm,
wishing that, you could cut it out of you for whatever reason. And then
yeah.
once I started getting educated on internal family systems, it was like, okay, so an exile has been triggered. And now that there's a firefighter response, and he's actually trying to protect the exile. So then you
Mm,
actually have more compassion for the response. And
yes.
then with the therapy, it allows you to actually go in and heal the exile. So the response isn't so crazy.
Mm,
So now there's a less intense response. And then you actually have compassion for why that's happening as well, rather than just hating it. So
yeah, and the
this is a
shame.
great thing. Yeah. And another, like, so an extreme firefighter response is a psychotic break
Mm,
because there's so much pain, you have to disassociate or become something else because you can't
yes.
process that pain. So it's a good way of actually understanding schizophrenia as well as a
Mm,
response. And you can
wow.
see that, whatever, like the pattern with my mother would be something really stressful is happening. She can't handle that stress. And then she goes into a phase of psychosis as a way of dealing with
Okay.
that stress
Yes.
response.
Yes.
It also gave me much more compassion for my parents as well, because I'm like, they have exiles as well, you know?
Yes.
So like, and then, so she's getting triggered and all these things. So I think it's like, for me, it's changed my life completely. I've recommended lots of friends to go as well. Loads of friends have gone. Because like when you
Amazing.
start talking about this stuff, people are like, oh, this
Yeah.
is what happened to me. And you're like, okay. Like,
Mm,
there's a lot of issues with a lot of people that is happening that you don't realize until you actually start having open conversations with people.
yeah.
So yeah, if there's any sort of, I think it's a great model in general. Like I use this a lot. Like I talk about parts in coaching as well. Like because if
Mm,
you're binge eating, that's a firefighter response to
absolutely.
something,
Yeah.
So it's a great
Yeah.
model to just basically understand. And then, oh, I'm such an idiot for binge eating. It's like,
Mm.
well, it's happening for a reason. It's not
Yeah,
because
it's
you're an
serving you
idiot.
in some way, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
even over exercising or binge eating. Like it has somehow served people. Like
Yeah.
it went through a stage of emotionally eating, and I got much bigger. And and I can really relate that actually it was serving a purpose at that time. So to work through the shame, I was trying to make friends with it as to why that was
Yeah.
my reaction. So that sounds amazing, Connor. I'm so glad you found that.
Yeah, I highly for yourself as well. It's probably going to be
Yeah.
helpful with the everything with your brother, and that you made a really good point as well. Like it served at one point in your life, that behavior really kept you safe or served you. But that
Mm.
was 30 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, and it's not helping you anymore. And that's just a really good thing for people to understand as well.
Yeah.
Um, there's actually a really good book as well called When Madness Comes Home. Have you ever read that book?
I've heard of it and I haven't got it yet. I will get it. Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about her sister. So
Okay.
like, and just her sister develops I'm pretty sure it's schizophrenia or bipolar. And it's like it's so accurate because you're like, oh my God, I totally
Mhm.
understand what she's saying and everything. So yeah, that
I'll
was
look
like
that up.
it's really really, really good. I think that's another interesting thing. I'm not sure about maybe not about what happened with you guys, maybe because it was your brother, but for our
Mm.
family, there was a lot of like disassociation, I realized. So
Yeah.
meaning like I'm 36 now, I really didn't know anything about schizophrenia up until about 5 or 6 years ago. And I
Okay.
didn't realize even that I was avoiding learning
Yeah.
anything about it. I
But
had
it's
just been
huge.
like pushed it away subconsciously. And
Yeah.
then what would happen is if I heard anything about it, I would get a like
Yes.
almost like a visceral response.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then this was the first book I read that I could actually read. I was like, oh,
Wow.
this was kind of, when I was starting therapy and everything like that. And then I was like, why do I not know the basics of this illness? Like, I didn't know
Yeah.
anything about it. And I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, this is complete, detachment from the situation.
But again,
Um,
that would have served you that protection because
100%.
you
Yeah.
possibly just wouldn't have been able to take it in because it's enormous. It's not just like, oh, I'll just sit and read this lovely little book. It's like really fucking serious, right? And it's really intricate and it's really
Yeah.
complex. So I think you're completely normal for having avoided that. I guess I nearly went the other way where I was just like, I have to be armored. I have to know every fucking thing that I can about this because I've got two other brothers and a sister, and so I was the one that kind of really delved in on it, to
And
learn
what's
more.
the ages of everyone? Like your brother
Um,
who's struggling with schizophrenia, and then what's it?
he's
What's
older than
the
me, and then we have
yeah?
one older than him, and then I have a younger sister, and then a brother who's younger than my sister in that order. But I don't know if you came across this or you probably know this already, but I feel that severe mental illness is really underserved in the fitness industry. Um, because I know it's very specialized, but there's a lot of talk about obesity, which is considered to be, the height of the worst, the worst situation you could kind of be in terms of, body shape and what it does to your body and health. But it isn't spoken about as much in terms of, well, what if that's a mental health condition then? Is
Yes.
nearly the equivalent of obesity is severe schizophrenia or something like manic depression or that type of thing. And because of the pathophysiologies of the medications that they're, I did the GP exercise referral scheme course through ILAM and the HSE, which is
Oh yeah.
one of the most difficult courses I ever did. I failed the pathophysiology section a few times, but I did it because I really also to do with my brother. I wanted to be able to help people with mental illness more, but I didn't feel I was qualified enough in it. So I started to work through the doctors with people with bipolar and depression, but it was incredibly challenging on every facet. And then I did some work with rehab mental health for those with schizophrenia as well.
Wow.
And I would go and help them. They'd come to my studio doing kettlebells, doing different things, but like they were just so underserved because it isn't included obviously in a fitness qualification or personal training qualification. Or then it's like, okay, we'll get you a physical what are they called again? Sorry, like not a physical therapist in terms of massage, but why is my brain?
Occupational therapist, is it?
Thank you, occupational therapist,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's either that or the other. You know, and I just, yeah, depression and anxiety is another topic related obviously to mental illness. And there's a lot of talk about that online. And, it's okay to not be okay and all of that. But what about the other end to that where it's for life? and it's fucking serious. And, you know, I feel that if I was a sufferer, it would be hard to find somebody to actually help me with that on a physical level. And I tried to search for uh, people to be able to help my brother with it. I thought I'd pay anything. I'd hire someone if I thought, but he just wasn't open to it. But it's like, it's something that I think is there is a gap in the industry, where I've had even other coaches come to me and say, look, I've got a new client, and they said they're on antidepressants and like they're acting a bit strange and things in the sessions, and what, you know, what do you recommend? And there's the whole scope of practice thing, but then there's also emotional and social intelligence to tap into as to, you know, how to coach these particular sector of the industry. Is I do feel that it needs to be opened up as a conversation, because there's going to be fit pros themselves who might be suffering themselves beyond just depression,
Hmm.
and maybe and they just feel they can never get into the industry maybe because of it, or they could never share it about maybe they've got bipolar or manic depression, whatever these labels, you know. And then you've
Yeah.
got the general population who might be struggling with it, who's like, so where do I go then in between? You know, my brother was in the mental institution several times, and okay, there might be table tennis, or let's go for a walk around the hospital, or then there was a gym, but they'd never go. And the other end of the spectrum was, I trained for a while. I did a stint as a tutor on personal training diploma courses and gym instruction, and we got in from the psychiatric unit in Galway, guys that worked there, they wanted to be qualified to teach in the gym to the users that would come in. So they came, and I helped them to get qualified in that.
Mm.
But unfortunately, they said it was empty. Like, there's fucking nobody's going in there. So they're in the hospital,
Yeah.
they're hospitalized. There's a gym, there's someone qualified, but they're just obviously not going in there. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I do know that it's a big problem, and it pains me. um,
Yeah. It's a yeah, this is like the figuring this out would be there's a lot of things you touched on there. Like one of my buddies in Melbourne, he was like, "Oh, I'm going to become a trauma informed yoga teacher." And I was like, "That's
yeah,
awesome, man." And I met him like a year later and I was like, "How's it going?" He goes, "People don't show up because they're traumatized." I'm like, that makes so much sense, you know? And it's like,
yeah,
so it's like getting the person who's suffering to actually come into the gym, they're over medicated, or maybe they have some sort of a, you know, a worry and anxiety to leave the house or to go into a group with other people. There's also a crazy stat. I don't know the exact number, but like for women who are overweight, obese, there's like a super high relation to sexual violence in their history as
absolutely.
well,
Yes,
which
yes,
is, you
that's
know,
right.
you don't hear that about. So that's, I think, the education side. I think like a PT can really catch a lot of things early on, like eating disorders, whether it's too much eating or under eating, but the education isn't there. Like we were talking about, most of the fitness industry have less than 5 years experience because it's very hard to make it financially viable. And then actually is like Mark Carroll. I don't know if you heard of him. He's an Australian coach. He's got a huge following, maybe close to 500,000 followers now. He's openly
Mhm.
talks about having bipolar or manic
Wow.
depression, which
Mhm.
is manic depression and bipolar. It's the same
Yeah,
thing, I'm
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
sure.
yeah. I think they've been
Yeah.
playing with the words. I don't know, you know, the way everything's PC now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll look him up. That's great. Great to know, because I think there's just such a big difference between trauma informed. I'm seeing that a lot. The trauma informed, a bit of a buzz thing. I think it's amazing and it's great, but is it
It's
necessary?
kind of the new mindfulness, I think, in a lot of
Yeah,
ways, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And
Yeah.
I think what you touched on about, you know, that statistic with obesity in women is absolutely relevant, because there's so much judgment going on with, you know, even the body positivity movement. And so
Yeah.
many women I've worked with personally, face to face and online, you know, they just wanted to cover themselves. They didn't want to be seen. They didn't want to be visible. They didn't want attention. And so the only way they could do that often was to have a shroud of body fat around them. But the judgment that they felt was huge, you know, from society. And I think it's partly why the body positivity movement has taken off so much. Now, I don't agree with clapping for people really reducing their longevity by being
Yeah.
overweight. I don't agree with it personally, but I think that more compassion and empathy kind of needs to be learned or educated as to why possibly that person like got to that physical state. Similar with the mental illness thing, when there's a lot of talk that goes on, you mentioned finances and everything, a lot of revenue is lost through cancellations. And so there's a lot of
Mm.
talk that goes on of like those bastard clients, go whatever, canceling. And I totally get it. It's really annoying, but often it's people with depression just literally cannot turn up. They can't show up. And that's what I struggled with when I worked with the doctors and they were sending me the people with depression. And some of them were like, I'll only come if it's dark. I'll only leave the house when it's dark. I don't want anybody to see me. And I used to meet them at these random locations sometimes, just to appease the anxiety about moving their
Mm.
bodies, But I think a personal trainer who's maybe new or doesn't have experience might just be like, they cancelled, and make it all about them and all that shit, And it's just like,
Yeah.
no, there's stuff going on here. Like read
Yeah.
between the lines, read the room. Um,
And it's kind of definitely with younger trainers, like that you always hear that type of like there's two problems there for every coach I've had I've had Dan John on,
awesome,
Andrew
Dan's awesome.
Reed. I was saying like just
Brilliant. Yeah.
coaching for like decades. It's all empathy is the
Yeah.
biggest trait with all of them,
Yep.
and which you have to have as a coach. But then also just like your systems are bad. If people just aren't showing up, that's
Yes.
your issues with your
On you.
systems, which comes back to the financial and business education side of things in the fitness industry as well.
Yeah, I think the financial and business side, and then the also like develop your social and emotional intelligence, like whatever about your sports science degrees and your macros expertise, that's great. But what have you actually done to develop your social and emotional intelligence so that you can kind of tune in to this a little bit more? And I think there's such a difference between empathy and enabling. And so it's nearly gone too far then sometimes on the empathy thing, where I had to really
Yeah.
find that balance where I could be incredibly empathetic, but not a walkover, and actually challenge clients and step up and go, okay, so you've said that you felt anxiety before leaving the house. I get it, but look how far you've come or you're going. And I think there's a real lesson and a skill to develop between like empathy and enabling. And
Mm.
it's a skill to kind of be learned. And to me, I just dove into um, like emotional and social intelligence, which is, I mean, it's something you can learn, but for some people it doesn't come. They just don't really give a shit, or they just don't have it. I don't know. There's different types of coaches, really, isn't there? But I do think it's the difference. What with AI, what with all of those things, that's what's going to set longer term coaches apart in the industry is social and emotional intelligence, empathy, and all of those things.
Big time. Yeah, totally. And like just like actually co behavioral change, like that's the big thing. Like of course, if someone can follow a plan, or I can go to ChatGPT now and it can make me a program, but it can't teach me how to change my behaviors based on decades of patterning and environmental situations that are set up to make all the wrong decisions. And yeah, that's coaching 101. Like if you can really just get people to change the things that put them into the position they're in today so they can be in a better position in the future.
Yeah, and I think it starts with yourself. So like I've gone through therapy, I've gone through all sorts of different coaching, like relationship coaching, money coach, like you name it, I've done it so that I can have worked through some of my own shit to be able to not
Mm.
project that onto clients. And I feel that sometimes your clients are a mirror of like where you're at. So if they're saying,
Yeah.
this client just isn't doing the work, this client is late, this client is like, have a look at how you show up yourself sometimes, or like deeper than that. I'm not just talking about like paying on time, showing up on time. Often there can nearly be this victim, hero, villain triangle that I think is prevalent in the industry, where the coach wants to be the hero. And I've been through all of this triangle, by the way. Anything I'm saying
Mm.
and I'm calling coaches out on, I've done heavily. where we want to be the hero. And so if someone's not showing up, we take it personally and we're like, God damn them. And maybe we take responsibility for their results. So we're like, look at this before and after that I did, because you want the recognition. Or in my case, look at
Mm.
other medal I just got, like in my Russia and kettlebells, like, wow, Sarah, who cares? You know, and then the victim thing is like, they cancelled on me, you know, or then the villain thing is putting the client as the villain of, you know, they're not doing the work, they're not opening up, all those different things. And so I tried to take radical responsibility for any part that I was playing in that, in order for me to also have a business that was financially viable. Because otherwise, if I was heroing too much in the triangle, I would let them off with cancellations, letting them pay late, all those things. And so it was affecting my business. So I had to take responsibility of what unhealed trauma do I have here that I need to work on in order for me to be a better coach and really fully coach them on the whole spectrum, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, there's a in the fitness industry, definitely there's a pattern of like people pleasers, and like, you know, I'm
Yeah,
definitely a people pleaser and that's
yeah,
something I'm working on. But in healthcare in general, it's that there's a specific term, but when you're a carer, you know, you're always looking after everyone else but yourself. And you know, if you do the psychological whatever screening on healthcare workers, like it's like the majority fit under that umbrella. So it's then
yeah.
you see, you know, burnout is huge in healthcare because it's like
Yes.
I'm going to put everyone before myself. Um,
Mm,
it's actually
yeah.
just as you were talking there, one part of the internal family systems system that I left out was that at the overarching principle of it all is the self, and that's where you're in
Yes.
complete alignment and you're living authentically as you by your values essentially, and that way then there's no conflict. You're feeling like, okay, like this is the decisions I'm making are the self, and that's kind of
Mhm.
what the therapy is aiming you to kind of be more self-led basically, so then there's not all this conflict or shame or anything with decisions or with responses, and that's kind of like self-mastery essentially. But then that never ends, you know. There's
Yeah.
a great quote, like my buddy Cahill, he's in Limerick. He loves Tara Brach. I don't know if you've heard
Oh,
of
I
her.
love her. I only listened to her this morning. There was like a
Yeah, so
conversation on it. She's amazing. I
he's
just
amazing.
love.
Yeah, and she has a story where she's like, you know, she's like in her 70s, spiritual guru, like has done tons of meditation. She's a psychologist as well, so she's done the spiritual side, the psychology side, and she was like talking about making mistakes still, you know,
Mm,
for her. And you're like, how can she make mistakes? And
yeah.
she's like, the term she uses is like, forgive the forgetting. So
Mm,
you
mm,
forgot again, you make a mistake, you're like, oh my God, I know this. Why am I doing this pattern again?
yes.
And then, so she's 70 and that's still happening to her. So she's
Wow.
like, forgive the forgetting, which I think is a lovely, lovely phrase.
That's lovely. That's really beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Forgive the
Yeah.
forgetting. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That really sticks. That's the really good one that sticks, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think what you mentioned about the values is something that if there was a coach listening, you know, who's maybe having that thing with clients where they're attracting in clients who just aren't a good fit, or you know, they're just, maybe they've fallen out of love of their business a little bit and they're on that hamster wheel of just like
Mm,
surviving. I think reconnecting with your values could solve so much shit in your business, because it's like, does this piece of content align with my values? Does these people who I'm following on social media align with my values? Um, does this client align with my values? Like, do you share your values? Like, so I'm sharing about freedom being one of my values, but I'm not tapping into that bullshit of, look at me on the beach in Italy living a freedom lifestyle. That's not the freedom to me. It's like, it's the freedom to fly to Ireland and see my family if I want to. You know, it's a freedom to take, like, my guy's a pizzeria owner, you know, he's Italian. And tonight he said to me, I've got a surprise. I've got the night off tonight. And I'm like, great. So it's the freedom for me to be able, I don't have clients in the evenings. I don't work really in the evenings.
mm, Yeah.
that's freedom to me. So for example, if you're fit pro or whatever listening, is like, is it clear like what your values are out there? Because that's when things go to shit, in my opinion, is when we go off track and out of alignment in our values. And then we slowly begin to maybe be in a self-imposed prison in our
Hmm.
business, because we just haven't kept on track with our values.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up because I actually had John Caprani. I don't know if you know John Caprani, but he's a marketer from Ireland. Really smart guy,
Yeah.
really good, great mind. And that was what he said was like around content is like get really clear on your values on like what do you stand for and what are you against, and make that
Yes.
really clear for people who are following you. Like, yeah, I'm pro this and I'm totally against this. And
Yeah.
I was like, that's such a, I had never heard someone say that until he said it, like in that frame. And now you've said it as well. So I just thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah, well, I mean, what drew me to you was, I think it was through Jonathan Goodman, maybe,
Yeah,
because
would
I was
probably, yeah.
heavily following him. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe someone like this exists. This is just awesome. And then I found your stuff through him, and I couldn't believe you were Irish. I was just like, wow, because your content was just hitting me so much. I was just like, yes, yes, yes. And it was so clear in your content what your values are and were, and so I think it can cut through so much noise when
Yeah.
you're really clear. But I think that thing about being afraid to stand, like, talk about what you stand for and against, is, for some fit pros, there's that whole fear of being cancelled, inverted commas. But if you've done that internal work that we spoke about, and you've worked through your trauma, then really you're like an unshakable tree, because you don't genuinely know that what your values are, and so you're not afraid to stand up and go, look, intermittent fasting is a load of bullshit, or whatever it is you stand against. I don't know. I'm not saying I stand against that, by the way. But
They're coming for you.
I think coaches are so afraid of suddenly the keyboard warriors going, "How dare you!" Rah, 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 rah,
Yeah.
rah.
Yeah, it's funny.
They're sitting in fear, on their laptops. And I lived like that for a long while, where I was just like, it's easier to be vanilla. It's easier if I don't give my opinion. And I was getting a lot of hate for Giraboy sport, kettlebell sport style. And so people are
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that's not strong first. Like, I've done the strong first test, the 24 kilo, like the army test or whatever. I smashed it as a female. I did the male test and smashed it. And so I'm
Yeah.
getting these comments, and I'm just like, dude, like, it's just a different style. Like, it's like in yoga, and they're just like, you're going to hurt your back. Um,
Yeah.
I just never stopped. I was like, Giraboy sport is awesome. And I kept talking about it. And it really helped me to build my resilience up of getting haters. So I then started to do posts that were like, hey, who's got beef with me? Hit me up in the comments, because I'm trying to practice my resilience. Like, hit me up with some type of shit, And
Yeah.
so many people wanting that were like, so like, what are you doing? But I think it's really important to do that. It's just like, yeah, like, bring it on. What type of shit have you got to say to me? Because I don't have anything to hide. I have a great reputation. There isn't really anything. Probably my brother's illness is the most sensitive thing
Yeah.
that someone could hit me up with as a as a negative. But other than that, I'm kind of like,
And it's
talk
not a negative,
about what
like
I
it's just
stand for.
maybe there's some, is it like a bit of shame on your side, or what would it
No,
be?
it's like a massive defensiveness and anger when I see people going, just think yourself positive out of this mental
Oh,
illness
yeah.
or shit like that,
Yeah.
where, you know, yeah, where there's, or just even the whole alcohol and drugs thing, sometimes the way it's like glamorized, or no, actually, I've got a specific one. Ayahuasca. Is that how
Yeah.
you pronounce it? Okay.
Ayahuasca. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ayahuasca, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, very alternative family upbringing, exposed to a lot of alternative stuff. Uh, and ayahuasca, like, and magic mushrooms and LSD and everything. I've seen people just have psychosis that they've never come down out of from that. But yet it's looked upon as if I'm so enlightened because I've just gone off to Brazil and invested in with this tribe thing and done a bit of ayahuasca. Like, maybe work through your shit. Like, does it have to be ayahuasca that gets you to that enlightened thing, you know. And I look at it in terms of my brother as to how some of those types of drugs would have really nearly killed him, and contributed to the psychosis. But it's nearly slightly trendy at the minute for people to go and find themselves and heal some things by doing ayahuasca. It's kind of just glamorizing another drug, in my opinion. But because it's natural, just like weed is, it's so that would be one thing that would would trigger me online to like be commenting, listen, you know. But I tend to hold back because it's just a waste of energy. I'd rather focus on the positive shit, you know, than the negatives.
Yeah, and like there is lots of research now around psychedelics.
Yeah,
It's a tricky one because a lot of it then is like, unless you've a family history of schizophrenia, this isn't a good idea. But
but that's not said through. Sorry to interrupt you. That caveat is never mentioned though when it's mentioned by some big person of influence online, maybe in the fitness or health industry. Often they're not putting that across of like, by the way, don't try this if you know you're unstable, or do you know what I mean? So people are like, oh,
yeah,
just do that. And then next thing you know, like they're hospitalized and they're going through a massive psychosis. And they're like, well, that influencer said it was cool. You know, and you're like, whoa. So I just
yeah.
come with more
I was big
evidence.
into like clubbing in my 20s, so there's
Me
lots of
too.
lots of drugs and clubbing.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, a lot of these people who were in that scene are into like ayahuasca now, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Now they're
It was
30, now they're
like,
in their 30s, but it's like they're figuring things out, but it's like I like everything shows that it does really show, like it seems to have a huge impact on a lot of people, but it is
yeah.
also that magic pill that's going to fix everything, which isn't the case. So I think there is definitely a place for it, like
Mhm. Yeah.
and but I get what you're saying totally about like it's easier to go to the rainforest, take something for 3 days, and then not have to do anything rather than go through tons of therapy and work on your daily routine and habits and relationships and have difficult conversations and train and eat and cook and all this
Yes,
stuff.
precisely,
It's easier
Connor.
to go to Brazil for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And because it's kind of trending and it's cool, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Tim Ferriss, like I'm a huge fan of his. Like he would have
me too.
popularized it massively, but now he's like, oh man, there's like everyone's like an ayahuasca shaman in Austin
Yeah.
now, and it's like, oh, it's my
Yes,
purpose.
Austin.
Like I,
Yeah.
I own it. Sarah, this is awesome. Such a good
Yeah.
conversation. We'll definitely do a round two, probably a round three as well. Maybe we'll talk more about the business side of things on the next
Yeah.
one. But where can people learn more about what you do? They've listened to you, they'd probably connect with your story. Where's a good place to send them?
Yeah, even hit me up on Instagram. I'm like Sarah Smith Coach on Instagram, and my DMs are always open. And just for final message for any coaches out there who are struggling maybe with mental health, like you know, get help. Like you know, would be something I'd say. And there's no shame in that. Or maybe you're dealing with clients, or maybe you're a carer or family member like Connor and I, and it's something that you're maybe not hiding, but like not putting out there. And I just think it's amazing that we've got the likes of Connor who bringing this conversation to the table on such a big platform of Facebook, because for me it literally made my day and I just felt way less alone with it. So just if there's
Mm.
other fit pros out there, like my DMs are open to, even if it's just to say, yeah, like I'm struggling or I've got a relative that's struggling, it can sometimes help just to share a bit, you know.
Big time, yeah. And also, I think if you're self-employed in general, I think getting therapy
Yeah.
is like for a lot of people, I think is going to be really helpful. It's just there's so much, in particular, the first 5, 6 years, it's so unstable.
Yeah.
You're going to be more compromised, I think, psychologically than someone who has a stable job and career. They don't have to do 50,000 different things and worry about their rent as well at the end of the day. So I think that's an important thing to think about as well if you are self-employed.
Absolutely, and people just don't get it. Like it's so hard to sit down and try to explain to somebody, look, I've got to get my brain to really go into deep work now on, say, creating content or whatever it is that you're doing. Like some people just won't get that, and they'll be like, oh, are you an influencer or are you this, are you that? And so I think it's important to have that, like have community and yeah, like
Mm.
just, yeah, to maybe know that sometimes some friends and family just won't ever get it, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's a different animal if you work for yourself. Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
think we'll leave it there.
A whole
Awesome,
other
Sarah. Yeah, yeah, new
podcast.
podcast. Really appreciate you jumping on,
Thanks so
okay?
much, Connor. I really, really appreciate this conversation.